Good morning. Nathan Hartgraves here. It's October the 3rd, 2025, 7:40 a.m. here in Louisiana. And I'm back to share my thoughts and different things this morning. So I've got this new microphone here. A friend of mine from church was gracious enough to give me this as a way to try to encourage me to do podcasting. And I had a number of people comment recently about how some of my older videos that I had uploaded to my YouTube channel, that you couldn't hear them very well. Even though for some reason, when I reviewed those on my computer and on my phone, I was able to hear them just fine. But I'm no, sound technologist, so I don't understand the ins and outs of that. So hopefully this microphone will assist in maybe making those things better. Let's see what happens. I wanted to get on here this morning and kind of go over some things that I've been thinking about recently, related to a conversation that I had with my wife last night. And it had to do with the subject of the celebration of Halloween by Christians. Now, certainly the question of Halloween is not without controversy within Christian communities here in America. Historically, the majority of Christians have recognized the secular holiday of Halloween in the past. And but now, at least for as long as I can recall, there's always been a question of for one, its legitimacy, and for two, whether or not it should even be practiced at all or observed at all by Christians. And this question is really coming out of, the evangelical world, which I kind of have my background in, even though I do consider myself an ancient Orthodox Christian. I attend an evangelical church with my family, and my wife was telling me that some of the ladies that she interacts with through a number of venues, throughout her day-to-day life, that some of these ladies are very much against the practice or the celebration or, just in general, the observation of Halloween. And so my wife was asking me what the history of Halloween was. And so we began to talk about it, and I began to read some stuff to her about, different theories. There are a number of theories about the origins of Halloween. And you got to kind of take those all with a grain of salt, because the modern observance of what we call Halloween today is a fairly recent phenomenon. Now, at least as far as I understand it, some of the traditions that go along with the secular observance of Halloween have their roots in the Middle Ages and in the early Renaissance and Enlightenment period, primarily in Northern Europe. The carving of pumpkins and this kind of thing, and some scholars have linked these practices to Northern European pagan festivals, fertility festivals that were held in the fall. One in particular is a Celtic festival that, if I'm not going to butcher the pronunciation, is a festival called Samhain. And certainly those festivals existed, and maybe even still do in some modern reconstructed forms of Celtic paganism. But the modern practice of Halloween, for the most part, is pretty benign in as far as, why people celebrate it. I mean, or why people observe it. So the question is should we as Christians observe it? Well, I think before we answer that question, we have to know exactly what it is what festival that is being observed is being called into question. And simply the dressing up in costumes is a benign thing. There's nothing wrong with it in and of itself. Even the carving of a jack-o'-lantern is benign in and of itself. And I would argue that nobody is a pagan on accident. Nobody's a Christian on accident. The practice of religious doctrine, or the implementation of religious doctrine or ritual in someone's life, in order for anybody to be called a Christian or a pagan or a Muslim, you have to practice. And in order to practice, I would argue that there has to be some semblance of an understanding. Now, not from not to be a theologian, but you got to have some semblance of understanding and intellectual assent that what you are doing is in fact true. I don't know anybody, and I'm sure they're out there, but I don't know anybody that observes the modern secular Halloween holiday and they actually believe that they are scaring away demonic evil spirits, that they are worshiping the devil, that they are doing anything sinister in that regard. And when you look at the history and in the ancient history as far as this day and as it's related to the Christian liturgical calendar, it's related to what is known as All Hallowtide, which is a series of days, consecutive days that are recognized for the remembrance of the departed Christians and martyrs and those individuals that have been recognized by the church as being saints. And that's where the word Halloween comes from, because Halloween, for those of you that don't know, is a derivation of Hallows Eve. And essentially every major holiday within the ancient Christian church was preceded by a vigil that was held the night before. And whether that be for Nativity, or what we call Christmas, or whether that be for Pascha, which is the Greek form of Passover that we call Easter in the West, any of these major holidays, almost all of them included a preliminary vigil at night. Now, there's no question that there's a little bit of blending of tradition, and I have argued in previous videos that, in my opinion, when the Christians came into these pagan lands, they identified certain cultural trends that were related to their overall way of life, and that would include their, what we would call in the modern world, our in the modern world, well, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So back to what I was saying about the embracing of, ancient practices. And the Christians would come into these lands and they would baptize the whole culture into Christianity, which is one of the reasons, in my opinion, why we celebrate and remember the birth of Jesus on December 25th. I don't know of anybody that would actually argue that Jesus was born on that day. But it just so happened that that day was already being recognized as a significant day in certain pagan cultures that the early Christian missionaries recognized had a correlation in some degree to the story of the gospel and the nativity of Christ. And so they simply baptized that day into Christ, and they used that day to celebrate the birth of Christ. I say all that to say, and this is something I was thinking about, that the tendency for modern people, in particular in the West, to develop and embrace secular holidays like Halloween and even the propensity of our government to establish civil holidays is really a direct result of the sterilization of ancient Christian feasts and holidays by the modern Western church. We've become so pragmatic and utilitarian that we have removed everything as being useless. And that goes for every form of ritual, especially in the evangelical world, the modern contemporary evangelical world. Now, I know there are plenty of evangelical churches that are probably still very ritualistic, but a lot of them would deny that it's ritual, because they have this antagonism towards ritual, as though ritual in and of itself is a bad thing, that it must be bad because of abuses of ritual in the past. And that is just a complete misunderstanding of what ritual is and the value of ritual. And in this case, the value also of festal holidays. And so, because man is an innately ritualistic creature, made by God to be that way, that void is going to be filled. It's going to be filled. And and so what happens is that people start making up all kinds of rituals, whether those rituals are things like the modern understanding of Halloween, or even rituals surrounding sports events and concerts. The American experience of professional sporting events is like the perfect example of a ritualization of an event to fill a void in the heart of man. I mean, when you look at what happens when someone goes to a professional sporting event, they dress a certain way. They have songs and commonly understood chants that they do. They even relate to the team so much that when someone asks if their team won, the response is, yeah, we won. We won. Not my team won, but we won. Participating in it to the fullest extent, even though you didn't set foot on that field. That is the essence of ritualism. And so, anyway, with all that being said, I think that instead of worrying so much about whether or not Halloween is, causing people to inadvertently participate in Satanism, which I would argue, on its face is not, that instead of worrying about that, we need to recapture. Now, there are plenty of Christians in this country that they don't need to because they're doing it. They're liturgical churches. They're practicing Christian ritual as it's been handed down by their forebears. But for those that are essentially antagonistic towards ritual and festal holidays within the church, there needs to be a rediscovery of that. And if they can rediscover that, then the need for all these other secular and civil holidays will go away. I mean, it should be of note, and I remember hearing the late Father Thomas Hopko, the Dean Emeritus of St. Vladimir's Orthodox Seminary, he talked in one of his podcasts that I listened to years ago about the American civil religion. and how the United States government and this idea of America, from its very beginning, sought to replace true Christian religious experience with the American civil religion, to where we have our own holidays, we have our own monuments, we have our own saints, the fathers of the country, all the way up to Abraham Lincoln, who was seen as some sort of Messiah figure shortly after his death. We have our own sacred texts. We have our own songs, America the Beautiful, all this. And so there's something to be said about that. So I would argue that we need to recapture in the evangelical church the value and the beauty and the importance of the ancient Christian festivals. I'll end with this, and this isn't a jab at the church that I go to, because the people at that church are wonderful, wonderful people. I know that, or in as much as I know them and see their works, I know that they love Jesus. But that's not to say that they can't be a little short-sighted on certain things, and just like I can be. But one of the things I mentioned to my wife was the fact that this last year, when the day of Pentecost came up, to my recollection, I don't remember the fact even that it was Pentecost was even mentioned at church. It wasn't even mentioned. Now, I come from a charismatic Pentecostal background, and where people, teach on the things like speaking in tongues and that kind of thing, very charismatic, signs and wonders. And the church I go to currently is an evangelical Southern Baptist church. And so, in a sense, I kind of understand the hesitancy to bring it up. But the importance of Pentecost, as it is communicated and taught in the scriptures, both in the Old and the New Testament, and the implications of all that for the Christian, is so important. And it's so important to what we believe as believers. And the fact that it wasn't even addressed, it wasn't even touched on, that I remember at all. I just find that to be that's a shame. I mean, okay, you don't want to acknowledge it, you don't want to observe it like we observe Christmas or Easter, okay. But at least talk about it. But there was no talk about it whatsoever, and it just was really a shame, in my opinion. But we live in a world today where the church has essentially sterilized everything that is not utilitarian and pragmatic, anything that they don't see as any kind of practical use and value, they've done away with as just dead and empty ritual. Well, I really got a problem with that. So that's my position on that, and that's my position on Halloween. If you feel convicted and you don't feel like celebrating Halloween or observing Halloween is a good thing as a Christian, then don't. And don't let your kids, and explain to your kids why you don't believe it. Carly, my wife, mentioned yesterday while we were talking about this scripture where Paul says that some people acknowledge that certain specific days as being holier than others, and some treat all days the same. And certainly the case can be said that some people celebrate, Halloween. They observe Halloween in their capacity. Some don't. Some celebrate Christmas, some don't. Some people think that the Christmas tree is a pagan thing. But then some don't. I personally do not believe that it is syncretism, what would be called syncretism, but other people do. And so we just have to kind of talk these things out and kind of come down on our own conclusions But all the while recognizing that we as humans, the way God created us, is very ritualistic, and ritual serves a function, and it serves a purpose, and it can be godly. It can be. I won't go into all that right now, but I did just want to say that I wanted to share my thoughts. I appreciate everybody that watches. I think I have one subscriber. I mentioned that the last time, that being my wife. And so I'm fine with just having one subscriber. But if you do see this and you want to leave a comment, let me know how the audio turned out. Hopefully it turned out good. And I appreciate your grace and your patience with that as I'm learning through the learning curve here of making videos and posting them to YouTube. I really appreciate it, and I hope everyone has a wonderful and blessed weekend. Godspeed.